The following program is brought to you courtesy of a grant provided by the Bank of Princeton.
Good evening. I'm Lou Goldstein, and welcome to another edition of Focus On. Tonight, my guest is David Sciarra, Executive Director of the Education Law Center. Recently, the Education Law Center has been at the forefront of many legal issues, and explaining it tonight, we're going to be talking about their role and the recent court decisions that have come up regarding state aid and state funding, along with other issues that the Education Law Center has worked on. David oversees and directs the programs and activities at the Education Law Center. A practicing civil rights lawyer since 1978, he has litigated a wide range of cases, including socioeconomic rights, including affordable housing, shelter for the homeless, and welfare rights. Since 1996, he has litigated to enforce access for low-income and minority children to an equal and adequate education under state and federal law, and has served as counsel to the plaintiff students in New Jersey's landmark Abbott versus Burke case. He also does research, writing, and lecturing on education law and policy in such areas as school finance, early education, and school reform. He received his bachelor's from the University of California at Berkeley and graduated law school from Temple. David, thanks for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Lou.
Well, I know that the Education Foundation and Law Center basically has done a lot of work recently, and maybe you could tell everybody what the purpose of the Education Law Center is.
Well, Education Law Center, or ELC as we're known, was set up 40 years ago by a Rutgers law professor, Paul Trachtenberg, who's still very active in education law. He decided to set up the organization strictly as an advocate for the education rights of public school children, particularly our most disadvantaged school children. So children with disabilities, we do a lot of special education work, English language learners, and at-risk students, low-income students. We've really focused heavily on trying to make sure that children who have special needs and children in our poorer communities have access to a high-quality educational experience as is required under state and federal law.
Well, one of the things I want to focus on today, and it's no accident that you're here given the recent court decision, is the recent Supreme Court ruling about the state being forced to fully fund the school aid formula originating from the 1981 Abbott versus Burke decision, which claimed the state failed to meet its constitutional obligation to provide a thorough and efficient education to students in poor urban school districts. And I know the special master, Judge Peter Doyne, basically made recommendations, and the Supreme Court ruled recently that the state has to fully fund it, and basically fund it in the poor urban area districts known as the Abbott districts. And I was wondering if you could comment on this, basically given the fact that the state aid was recently cut last year by Governor Christie, and what the effects of the decision will be, and what do you see the overall leanings of the court in this area to be?
Well, Lou, I think it's important for people to understand that New Jersey has a long history of underfunding districts, schools and districts in our poorest communities. And that goes to the fact that we have very small school districts across the state. We have over 600 school districts, as you know. And they're basically coterminous with municipal boundaries. And we rely heavily on the property tax to fund our schools. So that's a combination which over a number of decades has resulted in essentially two school systems, to simplify it. School districts where you have sufficient income and property wealth to raise enough to provide a high-quality education, right, alongside districts like Camden, Trenton, New Brunswick, and places like that, that because of white flight, because of urban decline, lower tax base, declines in property wealth, they've been unable to raise money off the property tax to support their schools. So this whole recent ruling comes out of a long-standing effort to ensure that the state really ensures that students all across the state, particularly those in our what I call our high needs districts, districts with very high concentrations of low income students and students with special needs, have adequate resources to deliver the type of high quality education that we expect. So in 2008, after many attempts, the legislature and the governor finally came up with a statewide school funding formula, which we really hadn't had for 30 years, which did a pretty good job of figuring out what the cost of delivering a high quality education is for all students across the state, determining the extra costs for low income students, students with disabilities, put it all together, presented it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court approved it, but conditioned it on actually funding schools based on that formula. So this latest court case comes out of this latest round of litigation resulted from the governor's failure last year to fund the formula, which is in law, not just for the urban districts, but for districts across the state. And a week ago, the Supreme Court agreed with us that that was a violation of the Constitution and ordered the state to come up with the money, the aid that the formula requires, but limited to the urban districts. And I think it's important that we talk a little bit about that, because the battle now shifts to the legislature and to the governor to carry out the court ruling. And I think it's important that we go beyond just the urban districts and make sure that all the districts that need extra help under the formula get it.
How can that be done?
Well, the court ruling said that the formula, and again, the court didn't make up this funding amounts. These were amounts established by the legislature based on education cost studies.
Right.
So the court said those amounts had to be funded, but because the court only had jurisdiction in the Abbott case over the 31 districts, it limited its order for full funding, formula funding, to those districts only. That's 31 districts, about a quarter of the state's public school children. These are the districts where the vast majority of low-income students, Black and Latino students, English language learners go to public schools. So those school districts have to be funded in the next budget pursuant to the formula. That requires an increase of about $500 million, it's estimated. But the formula also provides money, if it were funded, for many districts beyond those 31, and in particular a group of districts that have growing educational needs and have many of the same needs that you see in the urban districts, but have been shortchanged in recent years. We call these districts under adequacy districts or below adequacy districts, but it really doesn't matter. It's just a group of districts where there's a need for extra help. The formula would provide it. So what we need to do now is make sure that the legislature and the governor understand that we want the formula funded, particularly for districts that have a need, both the districts that are covered by the court order, but beyond that, because we want to make sure that the formula delivers the resources that kids in, let's say, Trenton need, but also poor kids in Hamilton Township, right across the border need, or Ewing Township need. So it's very important that that people in their communities find out how much their school district will receive under the formula, and make sure that their legislators in Trenton know that they expect them to follow through and not just fund the urban districts that the court has ordered be funded, but fund the rest of the districts pursuant to the formula.
I know the state has always invested in public education, in previous years. That's why, basically, the state of New Jersey is right at the top, educationally,
right.
As far as, learning and testing. My question to you is, do you think that the court's decision will have an impact in how taxpayers view it, as far as additional monies being needed, and where's that money going to come from? Will it be coming from taxpayers, or will it be coming from an existing pot that exists in the state? Well,
I think there's two answers to your question. One is that New Jerseyans have long supported high-quality public schools in their own communities, and I think they understand at the end of the day that they also have a responsibility to make sure that communities across the state have the resources that they need to provide high-quality educational opportunities. There's a lot of talk about suburban, middle-class, urban, a lot of folks who want to divide the state up into different groups. But I think at the end of the day, most New Jersey taxpayers, citizens, and people who care about this state understand that New Jersey's strength in its economy, its vibrancy, its culture, all of the great things that we have in the state really come out of the fact that we have great public schools. And you know, when you talk to business people, where they're going to locate, the number one issue, and you know this here in Princeton, one of the number one issue is not so much taxes, it's the workforce and the quality of the educational system in the communities that they're located. So we have built a very strong public school system. We've been strong in making sure that our schools have adequate resources, and I'm confident that, you know, once the message goes out about, you know, the formula and what the funding that's needed through the formula, people will support that. We do have a growing chorus of people that want to paint the New Jersey public schools as not up to snuff or somehow failing and not making, you know, not serving the state's kids, and nothing could be further from the truth. We do have one of the strongest public school systems in the United States. Our performance ranks internationally as a state, and we're a high equity state, meaning we do a good job of taking